The cold, unforgiving pavement of the city street served as Elena's mattress, a thin sheet of scavenged cardboard, her only shield against the damp chill rising from the concrete. She had learned the cruel calculus of invisibility, the way people's eyes would slide past her, deliberately unfocusing so as not to acknowledge the uncomfortable reality of her existence. To them, she was just another piece of the urban landscape, a faceless tragedy to be ignored on their way to somewhere important. But Elena knew who she was. She was a daughter, a failure, and the ghost of a once proud family name, now haunting the gutters of her own ruin. She would lie awake at night, hunger a dull, persistent ache in her stomach, and the shame a far more potent and corrosive acid in her soul. She had not just lost a business or a home. She had squandered a legacy, dishonored a name that her father and his father before him had built, with decades of sweat, integrity, and unwavering hard work. This is the story of that rock bottom, the desolate starting point of a journey from utter destitution back to dignity. Stay with this story to witness how a woman, stripped of everything, rebuilt her life from the ashes and in doing so, restored not just her own honor, but the very soul of her family. The Diaz family had been respected pillars of their community for over 50 years. Their name was synonymous with quality, their small artisanal furniture business, a local institution. Diaz & Son was more than a brand. It was a promise of integrity, a legacy of craftsmanship passed down through generations. Honor to her father, Ricardo, was not an abstract concept. It was the North Star by which he navigated every aspect of his life. It was everything. Elena had been the bright, shining heir to that legacy. With a sharp mind for business and a genuine love for the craft, she was meant to be the one to carry the family name into the modern era. Her father had proudly planned to change the sign to Diaz and Daughter the day she officially took over. The weight of that expectation had once felt like a warm, comforting cloak. Now, the memory of it was a crown of thorns. Her fall from grace had been swift and catastrophic. Fresh out of business school and full of ambition, she had convinced her trusting father to take out a massive loan to fund an aggressive expansion. She was swayed by a charismatic new business partner who promised incredible returns and global reach. This man, who had also become her lover, was a con artist of the highest order, and by the time she uncovered his web of lies and fraudulent contracts, it was too late. The business imploded, taking everything with it. The loan defaulted, the workshop was seized by the bank, and even their family home, which had been put up as collateral, was lost. Elena had not just made a bad business decision, she had single-handedly dismantled a 50-year legacy in less than 6 months. The speed and totality of the destruction was a source of unrelenting, nightmarish shame. Her father did not rage or scream. His reaction was far more devastating. He looked at her with eyes devoid of their usual warmth, filled instead with a quiet, bottomless disappointment that shattered her more than any anger could have. He didn't disown her with words. He simply withdrew, the light of his pride in her completely extinguished. The silence from the man whose approval she craved most was a constant deafening roar in her ears. Her descent into homelessness was a slow, degrading slide. After the foreclosure, her family moved into a cramped, rented apartment, the air thick with unspoken recriminations. The shame was too much for Elena to bear. Believing she was a toxic presence, she left, promising herself she would return only when she could fix what she had broken. She stayed on friends' couches until the welcomes wore thin, her savings dwindled to nothing, and finally, the street became her only option. Life on the streets was a brutal education in fear and dehumanization. She learned to sleep with one eye open, to guard her few possessions with a fierce paranoia, and to endure the casual cruelty of a world that had deemed her worthless. She became adept at finding sources of food and shelter, but she could find no refuge from the gnawing shame that consumed her day and night. The moment that would become her rock bottom arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Soaked to the bone and shivering, she had sought shelter under the awning of a bakery. The warm, yeasty smell of fresh bread, was agonizing. A mother and her young daughter walked out, the little girl holding a pastry. The girl made eye contact with Elena, her expression one of pure, innocent curiosity, before her mother quickly pulled her away, whispering, "Don't stare, honey. It's not polite." In that moment, Elena wasn't just invisible. She was a spectacle, a cautionary tale, and something inside her finally broke. That night, lying on her damp piece of cardboard, staring up at the light-polluted sky, Elena made a choice. The image of that little girl's face was burned into her mind. She could either lie here and let this life of shame and degradation slowly extinguish her spirit, or she could fight. She could claw her way back, inch by painful inch, not for a fantasy of her old life, but for the simple, fundamental right to be seen as a human being again. The next morning, driven by a flicker of resolve she hadn't felt in months, she got up. She walked for over an hour, her destination a place she hadn't set foot in since her downfall. The public library. Just pushing open the heavy glass doors and stepping into the warm, quiet space felt like a monumental act of re-entry into the civilized world. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. Inside, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in a dark computer monitor and was so shocked she had to stifle a gasp. The woman staring back was a stranger, gaunt and hollow-eyed, her hair matted, her clothes dirty and worn. Seeing the physical manifestation of her failure was a painful but necessary shock. This was not her. She would not let this be the final version of herself. The library became her sanctuary. For hours every day she would read, not for pleasure, but for survival. She used their computers to research homeless shelters, job openings, and social services. The quiet, orderly environment was a balm to her chaotic mind, a place where she could begin to formulate a plan, however fragile and rudimentary. Making the call to a local women's shelter was one of the hardest things she had ever done. It was a formal admission of her status, a surrender of the last vestiges of her pride. But the voice on the other end of the line was kind, and after a week on a waiting list, she was finally offered a bed. The thin mattress in a room shared with 7 other women felt like the most luxurious accommodation she had ever known. Life in the shelter was a lesson in shared humanity. She heard stories of hardship and resilience that made her own feel less unique, less isolating. She witnessed small acts of kindness, the sharing of a piece of fruit, a whispered word of encouragement that restored a sliver of her faith in people. The shame was still her constant companion, but now it was tinged with a nascent sense of community. After dozens of rejections, she landed her first job. It was washing dishes in the back of a bustling, greasy diner, grueling work for minimum wage. Her hands were perpetually raw and chapped, and she came home each night smelling of grease and bleach, her body aching with exhaustion. But she did the work with a fierce, unwavering dedication, grateful for the chance to earn her own way. The day she received her first paycheck, a small, crinkled envelope with less than $200 in it, she held it in her hands and cried. It was not a fortune, but it was hers. It was the first tangible proof that she could still create value, that she was not entirely broken. It was the first brick in the foundation of her new life. She became obsessively frugal, saving every single dollar she could. She ate the cheapest food, wore the threadbare clothes she was given, and walked everywhere to save on bus fare. Every coin saved was a tiny victory, a step away from the absolute destitution she had known. Her goal was singular, to earn back her independence. One evening at work, the diner's owner, a gruff but fair man named Sal, saw her studying a business textbook during her break. Instead of mocking her, he simply nodded and said, "Good for you, kid. Never stop learning." That small, unexpected validation from a stranger was like a splash of cool water on her parched spirit, a moment of recognition that gave her immense strength. She had not yet tried to contact her family. The shame was still too great. She could not face them as a dishwasher living in a shelter. She had to have something more to offer, something to prove that their belief in her had not been entirely misplaced. She vowed to herself that she would not see them again, until she could look her father in the eye as an equal. At the library, her reading shifted. She began to deconstruct her past business failure with a ruthless, objective honesty. She analyzed every mistake, every flawed assumption, every warning sign she had ignored. It was a painful process of self-assessment, but it was essential. She had to understand why she had failed, so she would never repeat those errors again. After 6 months of relentless work and saving, she had enough for a deposit on a tiny room in a boarding house. The room was small, the shared bathroom was grimy, and the walls were paper-thin, but it was hers. The moment she closed and locked her own door for the first time, she leaned against it and wept with a relief so profound it was almost painful. She was no longer homeless. She immediately found a second job, cleaning offices in the early hours of the morning before her shift at the diner. The exhaustion was a constant, bone-deep companion. She operated in a perpetual state of fatigue, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer, stubborn willpower. Her life was a grueling cycle of work and sleep, with every spare moment dedicated to her single driving ambition. In the quiet solitude of her small room, a new business idea began to take shape. It was inspired by her family's old trade, but adapted for the modern world. Instead of large, bespoke furniture, she would focus on small, beautifully crafted wooden home goods, cutting boards, picture frames, decorative boxes that she could make herself and sell online. It was lean, manageable, and rooted in the legacy she had lost. She spent her nights hunched over a second-hand laptop, crafting a meticulous business plan. She researched suppliers, calculated margins, and built a simple e-commerce website. This time, there were no charismatic partners or risky expansion plans. There was only a solid, realistic strategy built on hard work and a deep understanding of her own limitations and strengths. Securing a microloan from a community development fund was an uphill battle. She was rejected 3 times, her lack of credit history and stable address working against her. But she persisted, refining her plan, gathering letters of recommendation from Sal and a supervisor at her cleaning job. On her 4th attempt, a loan officer saw the fierce determination in her eyes and decided to take a chance on her. The $5,000 loan felt like a fortune. The day she bought her first set of professional-grade carving tools and a small supply of quality hardwood was one of the most significant of her new life. Holding the smooth, heavy tools in her hands, the familiar smell of cherry and oak filling her small room, she felt a connection to her father, to her grandfather, to the very soul of her family's honor. This was the beginning of her redemption. She turned her tiny room into a makeshift workshop, the floor constantly covered in a fine layer of sawdust. She worked late into the night, after her 2 other jobs, her hands, already raw from dishwater, becoming calloused and strong. The work was demanding, but it was also a form of meditation, a way to pour her pain, her hope, and her resolve into something tangible and beautiful. Her first online sale was for a single, intricately carved maple picture frame. When the notification popped up on her phone, she stared at it in disbelief, her heart pounding. A stranger had seen value in something she had created. It was a validation so powerful, so pure, that it brought her to her knees. She packed the frame with meticulous care, including a handwritten note of thanks. Slowly, painstakingly, her small business began to grow. Her products, marked by their quality craftsmanship and elegant design, earned glowing reviews. Word of mouth began to spread. She reinvested every penny of profit back into the business, buying better tools and higher quality wood. She was building a reputation based on the very principles she felt she had betrayed: integrity and quality. A year into her venture, she reached a milestone that made her weep with pride. She hired her first employee, a young woman from the same shelter where she had once lived, to help her with packing and shipping. To be in a position to offer someone else a chance, a steady paycheck, was a powerful affirmation of how far she had come. She looked at her life now, the thriving small business, the humble but clean apartment she had moved into, the calloused but capable hands, and she saw a stranger, but a good one. The desperate, shame-filled woman on the street was a ghost from a past life. This new Elena was a survivor, a builder, a quiet testament to the strength that can be forged in the fires of utter failure. The time had finally come. With a heart full of a terrifying mixture of hope and dread, she knew she was ready to face her family. She was no longer the bringer of ruin, the daughter of shame. She was a business owner, a creator, a woman standing on her own 2 feet, and she finally had something to offer besides a broken apology. She did not call first. She knew her father might hang up, too proud or too wounded to speak to her. Instead, she took a bus to the small, unassuming apartment complex where they now lived. Standing outside their door, she felt a wave of fear so intense it almost made her turn and run, but she took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened, and her father, Ricardo, stood before her. He looked older, wearier, the light in his eyes dimmed by the disappointments of the past few years. He stared at her, his face a mask of shock, confusion, and a flicker of something she dared not name. He saw not the ghost from the streets, but a composed, well-dressed woman, her expression one of quiet, steely resolve. "Papa," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. He remained silent, his hand gripping the doorknob. She didn't launch into a pleading apology. Instead, she opened the briefcase she was carrying and laid out a folder on the small hallway table. It contained her business plan, her sales records, her glowing customer reviews, and a concrete proposal. "I can't erase the mistake I made," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But I have spent every single day since then trying to build something new, something strong, something honorable." She explained her business, her vision, and then she made her offer. She had just signed the lease on a small workshop. She wanted him to be her first employee, her master craftsman, her partner. Ricardo looked from the documents to his daughter's face, and for the first time in years, she saw the wall of his disappointment begin to crack. He saw not just her success, but the brutal, relentless hard work it must have taken to achieve it. He saw the ashes of their old legacy, and from them, the undeniable spark of a new one. The pride he had buried so long ago began to surface. The moment of reconciliation was not one of loud, dramatic declarations. It was a quiet, sacred thing. He simply reached out, his calloused craftsman's hand covering hers on the table, and squeezed. A single tear traced a path through the weary lines on his face. "Mihija," he whispered, his voice thick with years of unspoken pain and love. "My daughter. Welcome home." 3 months later, Elena used her business profits to make the most symbolic purchase of her life. She bought back the original Diaz & Son business name from the corporation that had acquired it in the bankruptcy. The day she hung the newly restored, freshly painted sign above their new workshop, with her father beside her, was the day she felt her family's honor was truly restored. The business thrived under their combined expertise, her modern business acumen and his old-world craftsmanship. They rehired some of the old employees who had lost their jobs, and the workshop once again filled with the familiar comforting sounds of saws and sanders, a symphony of renewal and second chances. Elena often thought about her time on the streets. The memories had lost their sharp, cutting edges, but she kept them close as a reminder. Homelessness had been her crucible, a brutal and unforgiving fire that had burned away her arrogance, her naivete, and her pride. It had been the most horrific experience of her life, and also, in a strange and profound way, her salvation. She learned that honor was not a static, inherited thing to be polished and displayed. True honor was dynamic. It was the grit to face your failures, the courage to start again from nothing, and the integrity to build a life and a business that you could be proud of, no matter where you started. It was earned in the fight, not given at birth. Standing in the doorway of her bustling workshop, watching her father expertly guide a piece of wood through a saw, a genuine smile on his face, Elena felt a sense of peace that her old, privileged life had never given her. She was not just the daughter who had saved the family business. She was the woman who had been homeless and had found her way back, stronger, wiser, and more honorable than she had ever been before.